Hey, how's everybody doing today? So this is going to be my synopsis of part two of Atlas Shrugged. Trying to get these through. Hopefully, I'll get to part three a lot faster than I've gotten to part two. I apologize for the, I think, 28 of you right now that have watched this video. Not as popular as my others. Oh well. If you notice, Sonia's not with me. She's going through something called brewmating. It's kind of like hibernation for bearded dragons, so you go look it up. Long story short is I'm not disturbing her because she's sort of sleeping. Anyway, before I officially jump in, I just wanted to make a quick statement. My Bill Brockbrader video that I did a few weeks ago has been soaringly popular, as well as my Drake one. But the Bill Brockbrader one has had the most interesting activity in the threads, in the comments, that I've personally gone back and forth with and have enjoyed. And gotten some really interesting criticism about. And I just want to say, for the record, that I've heard a lot of good information that helps me tend to believe that also Bill Brockbrader, although his story that we're interested in may be true, such as talking about, timeline A, timeline B, and aspects of Project Looking Glass, etc., etc. Although that may be true, it may be completely, it may be something that he made up as far as his personal connection with it, and that there may actually be some legitimacy to the fact that he may simply be a sexual predator. I've heard a lot of things, including a guy who says he's Bill Brockbrader's son, which I'm sorry, kid. I don't believe it, but that doesn't mean that that I still believe that Bill Brockbrader is who he says he is. So that's where that's at. The fact that he's been silent this whole time, and it seems that his popularity has waned as well, just like what seemed to be him going somewhere for the truth movement. Has completely stopped. Ava could be speaking on his behalf. She's not. So just getting that out of the way. Let's stop wasting time. Let's get into this Atlas Shrugged thing. So, in part one, we left off with the discovery of the broken free energy device, the engine, and the hunt for the mind that created it. Meanwhile, the government is pushing forward with its wealth redistribution under the assumption that greed in and of itself is causing want and suffering. And government must force those who contribute to the economy to run their businesses the way they think it would best serve the people. That's the overall, that's the overplot of what's going on in the book. So, through the second book, most of Rand's focus is on this systematic stripping of the economy, as practices of business are forced to reduce productivity to help other inferior businesses keep going, even though those businesses were dragging the economy to begin with, such as competing railroads to Dagny's Railroad, competing steel producers to Reardon Steel. Those are the big examples from the two big main characters. This parallels government subsidies in real life. The best example is the farm subsidy that Monsanto is the beneficiary. Mom and pop farms, big and small, who are subject to the same taxes and regulations, who don't have the corporate support, receive no help from the subsidized aid, while well, not no help, but basically the help is worthless because it's just that subsidy, as opposed to the subsidy plus the corporations, investors pumping ass loads of money into it, and then of course the subsidy is disproportionate based on the size of the farm, and of course the big corporations have the biggest farms. So there you go. But enough about my Monsanto rant. That's obvious, and Monsanto will be out of business in a few years anyway, if not sooner. Anyway, who are subject to small taxes and regulations, who don't have corporate support, receive no help from the subsidies aids, while major producers buy them out. Moments like these occur often, where I can't help but think Ayn Rand was right. An important speech occurs in the middle of part 2, at one of the major social parties that has a mix of producers and looters. An important supporting character, Francisco D'Anconia, who owns the best copper mines in the world down in Mexico, and is also an ex of Dagny, is at the party. He makes this big floor speech in defense of money, because everybody's lips at this party is talking about money being the root of all evil. We all know the cliche about greed and money and this, that, and the other thing, and this is that exact same cliche, still being talked about today. Ayn Rand's talking about how they talked about it in basically 1957. So where the looters in the party simply want to make money, take money away as the root of all evil, Francisco simply tells us that money is the agreed rate of exchange. Nothing more, nothing less. The power to control its value is the issue. So, Dagny's trouble in general comes from being only the vice president of the Taggart Railroads. Her older brother, is the guy who's actually in charge. She's more or less administrative, and really the brains of the operation. But her brother, unfortunately, has sided with the statists, and has systematically starts crushing the railroad with no understanding of how that can happen. Meanwhile, Reardon Steele is blackmailed into compliance because some of the statists threaten to ruin Dagny's public image because she slept with Hank, who was a married man. This kind of practice is commonplace in behind-the-scenes politics of sex scandals and things like that. Keep in mind, I'm giving you such a Reader's Digest version of this massive book, and I'm just trying to give you enough to basically ask you to find the patience to read it. So I apologize if I make this sound really confusing, because it kind of is. It was a hard read, like I said. Anyway, after the forced compliance of Reardon Steele with the government, he eventually is forced to selling his product to the government. Basically, the government telling him who his customers can be, one of which being them. Even though they had spent the entire first part of the book saying Reardon Steele was incredibly dangerous. Oh yeah, and this deal is a secret deal, so the public doesn't even know that the government is making this deal with Reardon. But they're forcing him to do it anyway. So he basically refuses and chooses to sell it to a private interest that would be more mutually beneficial deal. The law made it a crime for him to conduct good business for everyone's benefit. It is hard to be innocent when everything is against the law. Hank ends up on trial against the state. His trial statement is a very profound statement. It's just like the D'Anconia speech. It's another very important moment of statement, and it's probably about as long. And it's this moment where he has all this civil disobedience, and he refuses to even give a plea of guilty or not guilty at the trial because he doesn't recognize the system as a just system and worth entertaining. And because he's catching the government in some serious hypocrisy that they've committed, he ends up winning this trial with public support. It doesn't slow the government down much, but it does help him keep a moniker of his of his freedom and his company. Throughout the story, Dagny is still pursuing the motor inventor from part 1. Her lead ends at a diner where an old mentor who was one of her teachers of philosophy was working at the diner. He's basically a burger flipper. And he did this as his own deeply personal choice. One that was so personal he didn't even want to talk about it with Dagny. He also does know who made the motor, but would not tell her who, and was telling her that I know, and that I'm not going to tell you who. Basically, he knew that Dagny was not ready to know the secrets yet. She had not the right, I guess, motivation yet in mind. Basically because he wasn't just a teacher of philosophy, he lived his philosophies. he saw what was going on with Dagny, and there was something wrong with Dagny's pursuit in his mind. And I don't remember it off the top of my head, and I took this book out from the library, so I didn't have it on me to open up the page when I was writing my script here. So, anyway, as a philosopher, where was I? So, long story short is that the reasoning made perfect sense in the fact that, her ideas were still a little too much in the way of, I guess, like serving society in a more detrimental way. I'm trying to think of how it really worked, because we all know how Ayn Rand's perspective on things are. I ended up agreeing with it. I thought it was really interesting the way it was, the way he challenged. I mean, I'm a person of my own, moral standards and my own philosophical views, and I would say I might be in the same position if I'm worried that somebody who I know I could personally trust, but maybe I also see that they are making a mistake they don't yet realize. Because he probably wanted to tell her, but it's just like, I can't tell you now because you aren't ready. There's something you have to discover for yourself, and to move on in that way. And hell, and part of it was her not understanding why he's flipping burgers for a living instead of sharing his philosophical wisdom in the classroom. And it gets it gets into that. So over time, Dagny gets frustrated and quits the railroad because of the way her brother is running it. Because it won't let her work unless it's interrupted by the state in some way. So she takes time off grid at her upstate cabin. She, however, cannot keep her concern for her father's legacy and her own passion for railroads out of her head. She discovers another crisis after being away for maybe a couple months, where her brother created while working with the government, and she can't stay away any longer. So she gets pulled back in. It's I believe what was going on here in this part of the story was showing that Dagny had a desire to get out of the system, but she cannot separate who she is from the severance. From that severance, which becomes an important point in the last part of the book. In other words, it's like when she went away in the cabin that she was, that she was pulling one of those disappearances, because throughout all three books, a lot of the major producers in the world that were producing, oil, that had oil reserves, and even Francisco D'Anconio at one point, he'll disappear. They're all like making these disappearances, and that's what people thought that she was doing, which I don't want to spoil anything until the part 3, but long story short is that the good reasons that Ayn Rand put in for people to basically do the shrugging, to be the Atlas shrugging the world off of his shoulders, was very much like this. But the problem is that, she also still wants to do what she wants to do. She still loves like being a railroad woman and all those things. So it would be like me saying, fuck it, I don't want to I don't want to sell out to the man, and so I'm gonna stop making music. It's not gonna happen. I'm gonna go off into a cabin somewhere. I'm still gonna grab my guitar and I'm still gonna want to play, and then it's gonna annoy me because I'm gonna make some great music and be like, I want to share this with people. So I got to go back, and it's that same mentality where you can't what you do has to work, and you have to find a way to do what you do still. Otherwise, you're not going to be happy, and that's what was going on with her. So Dagny is effectively one of the only people in the country who actually understands the whole railroad system, what needs to be done, and how to do it. The rails really can't operate without her, but they want to make the whole system work to compete with other railroads when her natural ability is superior. But of course, that's unfair. This is the issue with planned economies. You create a system under presumption of success, and by necessity, and then select a person to run the program based on their loyalty to that ideal. That is the leadership structure in Rand's version of the American statism. So the second book ends with Dagny pursuing a lead by plane after a train line goes down that she was on. She is certain she has found the man who invented the free energy engine, and she gets a plane. She flies solo in pursuit of the stranger, whom she follows deep into the wilderness. I presume it was somewhere near the Rockies, because she really gets out in the middle of nowhere. You're not really sure where she is because she's so focused on following this other plane. She eventually comes in too low on her approach, following the plane that was also running low, and then she gets into a crash, and that crash basically is where book 2 ends, and then book 1 begins, right literally there, and the first 2 chapters of part 3 are some of my favorites, and it's pretty juicy. I'm going to enjoy talking about that when it comes to it, but that I'm saving for the next video. So you guys take care. I hope you liked what I had to say.